Welcome to the A+ Edtech Coaching Podcast, a podcast dedicated to talking about all things EdTech coaching.
In this episode, I take some time to discuss the question, what is an EdTech coach, with a panel of coaches. These individuals come to this conversation with various types of experiences and from some very different locations. Throughout our conversation, we try to define what an EdTech coach is, while also discussing some of the misconceptions about the role.
Well, welcome you guys. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, and let's just kind of go around the panel and introduce yourself and give us a little bit of information about your background with EdTech coaching.
Thanks. So my name is Jeff Mao, and currently I'm the Executive Director for VitalLearn, which is the state of Vermont's ISTE affiliate. But my background, I guess, in all of the space goes all the way back to the early 90s when I first started teaching. So my very first school, straight out of college, decided to launch a one-to-one laptop program in the fall of 1993. So I got pretty quickly flung into the EdTech space. And of course, for whatever reason, I guess because I knew how to print to a printer that was in a room other than where I was sitting, I became the tech guy. But we were very early in the space of trying to even figure out how we used technology as a learning tool. So I don't even think we had terms like EdTech coach at the time. But anyway, I was a classroom teacher for a number of years, and then knowing a little bit about tech, eventually became a tech coordinator in a building and then a district. And eventually went chasing after the Maine Learning Technology Initiative program in the state of Maine when they started issuing laptops to all the kids. And so when that program was launched, I became an IT director in a district in the state, and within 2 years was the state EdTech director, and so ran that program for about a decade. And so I've worked with folks in the role, and in fact, in the 10 years I was at the department, I think we saw schools in the state of Maine move from having no tech staff to having to at least assign somebody to be the technical person, to evolving roles that we now, I think of as EdTech coaches and such. And so I've kind of seen the system from up and down, classroom teacher to school administrator to state bureaucrat to now working at one of the ISTE affiliates and helping lead that charge. Spent time with Common Sense Media, working with them and working with, tech coaches, EdTech coaches all over the country. So that's kind of my background.
Yes, I am Adam Juarez. I'm an EdTech integration coach for Cutler-Rossi Joint Unified School District out here in rural Central California. This is now coming to the end of my 16th year in education, all in this district. In the first 9 years, I was a U.S. and world history teacher for middle school and high school. And in the last going on 7 years now, I've been in this role as an EdTech integration coach. How did I get this job? Well, I happen to be out here in California. I don't know what it is in other states, but we have this new law called LCAP, which is more local control over your funding and what to do with it. So we were in this first LCAP meeting, and I happened to be in a breakout group with our assistant superintendent, and then she just loved my ideas of how we could use the money. And I was a full-time classroom teacher, and all of a sudden a tech coach job opens up. It's a brand new thing. They just bought Chromebooks just because they were starting online testing. That's why they bought the Chromebooks. So then they decided to jump on they heard this new thing about EdTech coaching. So they said, let's hire one. And they heard about that. I was pretty creative and innovative with the limited tech that I had. So they offered me the position, and I ran with it. And first thing they said to do, all right, we're going Google. So you need to go learn everything you can learn about Google and bring it back and train us. So I jumped on that bandwagon, and I've got virtually almost every Google certification that you can get, from level 1, level 2 trainer, now innovator. And it's taken me around the world to connect with you guys right here. If it wasn't for making that decision to dive into Google head first, I wouldn't be here with you guys right now. My wife and I, Katherine, wouldn't be married. We wouldn't even have written a book had I not done that. So, all that, being an EdTech coach has, been probably the most life-giving experiences of my life, and just continue to grow with this job, and it evolves daily. So just enjoying the ride.
And I'm Katherine. Adam's wife and an ed tech coach as well. I began in education as a music teacher, and then I moved into the public sphere and taught elementary. And when I was teaching sixth grade, I applied for a pilot program to have one-to-one iPads. This was way back in like 2014. That was brand new for our district, and I applied. Actually, I applied for one-to-one for 3 classes at our site, which I learned from my principal was like 10% of all the iPads they were going to be giving away. And I said, I don't care. I believe this is the way it needs to be. And I wrote it up anyway. And fortunately, he signed it. So I ended up expanding the whole program. But I learned just as a classroom teacher, the power half the year was with no technology except a laptop that I brought from home and let my kids, begged IT to put on the network and let my kids kind of be on and do some things with. And then the other half of the year, same kids, same class with those one-to-one iPads. And it was a game changer for my teaching, for their learning. And so I just became really passionate about wanting to expand that. So I became a coach just at a single school site, coach of all things, so to speak, but certainly had that ed tech lens the whole time, just because that's what I was passionate about. Did that for a couple of years and then moved to our county office. So I'm an ed tech coach at a county office. Technically, I'm an ed tech consultant, but I work with the schools in our county, largely those that are real small and don't have the money to have an ed tech coach like many districts have the opportunity to do. So I work with them a few days per year so that they at least have some sort of support. Yeah, love what I do. Like Adam, I'd say probably 98% of the districts in our county are Google. So our Google Workspace. So went through all the certifications as well, trainer, innovator, all that stuff. And now working to train more. So glad to be here. Thanks for having us here on the podcast.
Hi, my name is Steve Katz. My current position is Elementary School Technology Coordinator at the International School of Kuala Lumpur. This is my 6th year in this school. And I'm actually by trade a social studies teacher, middle school social studies teacher. And I started in LA County in California and taught 12 years there before moving internationally. And since then I've taught in Costa Rica, Korea, and here in Malaysia. My first coaching position was in 2001 in California, and there was a district position open that was a district program, but a site position. So I applied for that and got that. And we were doing some great stuff with educational technology and literacy and something we call global studies, which is a whole nother podcast. But and over in the schools that I've been at since then, I've had a variety of teaching and coaching positions, and they're always called different things. I've also been a tech director, and I've helped implement one-to-one programs in 2 of the schools that I've been in, and helped to strengthen those programs basically in every school that I've been in since then. And really a lot of it has involved professional development, where I think probably all of us here have been heavily involved in professional development, even though you may not have mentioned it, but that's just kind of goes with the territory of being a coach. I'm an ISTE CAP trainer. So Jeff, when you were talking about ISTE, it was that rang a bell for me. And I've also taught at 3 different universities, master's programs. Generally, it's the tech course for leadership masters or teaching masters or whatever it is. So that's something I've been doing since 2001 as well. And right now, I just try and hustle and help as many teachers as I can and try and bring some innovative lessons into the classroom and hopefully give the kids the best learning experience that they can possibly have.
think my favorite part about this group is we've got, and I apologize for the old dog that will not be quiet if I'm not holding her. But I think my favorite part about this group of people that we've pulled together here is that there is the perspective of not just the ed tech coach from the school level, but we've also got some district perspective, which I have found because I was an ed tech coach and then I moved to tech director. And I have found that that's a very different perspective. And I mean, I don't know if you guys agree with me or not, but in how the role is set up and what you're trying to, when you're trying to answer the question that we're going to try to answer tonight, I think it's two different things. Is what is the ed tech coach? So with that being said, let's roll straight into that and talk about what is an ed tech coach and how do you answer that whenever somebody asks you that question. So, and I'm not going to roll call on this one. You guys just jump right in.
I get, so I'll jump in. I guess when someone says like, what's an ed tech coach? Because oftentimes it comes up just when someone you don't know says, what do you do? Right. And you say, oh, I work in ed tech. And then, you're trying to explain all that. And in general, for an ed tech coach, to me, it's, the role is probably always the same regardless of the level, meaning there are ed tech coaches at a school, there are ed tech coaches at district levels. As you said, we've got kind of lots of different perspectives. I ran a state program, and so I had a crew of people who worked for me. I think one of the most talented bunches out there who were my ed tech coaches who worked across the state. They worked for me at the State Department of Ed and then provided services to schools, both to their ed tech coaches as well as directly to their teachers. But it ultimately comes down to trying to support teachers in helping them leverage technology to both improve their instructional practices, but also to help the teachers learn how to help them help their kids use the technology to help their learning. Because fundamentally the holy grail, from my perspective, has always been how can we improve the learning process and leverage technology to its fullest to enhance whatever that process is, right? So can we do things that we couldn't have done before, or can we do the things that we're doing but do them so much better because technology's there? And so part of that improvement of the learning process may be something that it gets tweaked and done in the instructional aspect, but it might be in the construction of a learning object as the student is building something, whether it's building meaning just simply writing a paper, or building something because they're creating some cool digital product, whatever it is, but they've got this construction tool now that can do things that, many of us couldn't do years and years ago. So that's the ed tech coach to me is working in and around that big goal, and just kind of depends on who you're working with as to what the content of the day is. But that's kind of, to me, that's what the goal line always is. And so I always try and keep people aligned on that as you're kind of thinking, you always get pushed left and right over, and bumping over things, but that's kind of the guidepost.
Yeah, I'm glad you like what you said there about how it's a process. The learning is a process, and I think a lot of people think that it's not a destination. It's all about the journey. It's the process. And I think as a role as an ed tech coach I've been in this game now for going on 7 years. A buzzword that I've been hearing a lot from my admin the last couple of years, and I kind of have taken it on as my new mantle. I call myself a professional thought partner, because I'm working with teachers and students alike, and we're bouncing ideas off of each other. And I'm not gonna, in our book that we wrote, The Complete Ed Tech Coach, we don't talk about, we always kind of shy away from doing, those after school PDs, sit and get, very traditional. They're not going to learn anything, unless they're really motivated to. You're not going to learn anything really valuable that they can go and implement. But in the way we like to coach, our organic approach, it's very personalized. It's one-on-one, and we have to see what they're doing in the classroom first, and we leave feedback, and then we follow up. And it's in those conversations where they're bouncing ideas off of us and back and forth. And that's where the whole thought partner position comes in. And by doing that, we're able to really, like we say, organically meet the needs of that teacher based on their current context and what their pain points are, instead of coming with as the expert with the one size fits all strategy. And again, right there, that fits into what you say. It's a process. There's no, it's just going through those failures of bouncing ideas, and that's where the real authentic learning comes in.
Yeah, I agree that I agree with everything that's been said. Definitely, when we think of being a coach, we think of what we don't like to do is be a PD delivery system, right? Like we're more than that. We are really about, I want to empower teachers. And to do that, I feel like it's much better for me to feel like I am a coach and I'm on your side and I am encouraging you, and rather than I'm just giving you a whole bunch of ideas and giving you a whole bunch of PD. And so when you are working with a large district and you have a lot of teachers, the coach role can still be coaching the coaches, for example, coaching those that are, coaching those teachers to kind of learn how to, that's something I'm doing next year. Is the plan is to coach some teacher leaders to then coach their teams through the process of lesson design that will purposefully integrate technology, leading with learning. So definitely, I think a coach is a cheerleader, a coach is on your side, a coach is there to help you be your best, and not to say everybody must play this way. Every classroom must look like this. So definitely agree with everything that was said.
I would say I agree with everything that was said too. And just to add on to that, I mean, I think the basis is we're trying to improve teaching and learning, and that's fundamental for whatever we're doing as a coach. I think that, we work on skills, we work on tools, we work on mindset. That's all really important in these relationships that we build with our teachers. I'm kind of a one-to-one. It's me and the teacher, where you guys have larger district situations, but for me, it's me and the classroom teacher. And I think that as a coach, what's important is, we need to have a reason to coach. There needs to be something that needs to be improved, or something that there's a desire to improve something. There's a current reality that the teacher would like to change or the school would like to have changed. And I think we can go in and help set some goals and develop some strategies to meet those goals, and then support the person who we're coaching in order to attain those goals. And like I think Adam said, empower those teachers to be able to go ahead and go on in the future without us and continue on that journey. So just like we would do with our students, we teach them algebra so they can go on to algebra 2, right? And we don't need to be with them again for that next level, of course. I also want to say that I think that co-planning is really super important in the coaching process. And I think a lot of times, and I've seen this especially as we have teachers go in and out through international schools. There's a higher turnover than, say, my school in California that I taught at. There's a lot of times that they think the coach is just going to come in and do a lesson, like, can you come in and do something cool? Or we're doing maps. Can you come do a cool mapping lesson? And some of the teachers really want to learn from that, and other teachers want to go have coffee. Fortunately, most is the first case, that they do want to learn from you. But I don't really consider that coaching. That's more of a push in, computer teacher or whatever you want to call it. And so I think that's an important distinction, is that it's really a partnership. And in order to have that partnership with the teachers, you have to build trust and build those relationships. Otherwise, they're not going to let you into their classroom unless they're mandated. And that's not really an ideal situation. But I also want to say, I think that, like, a lot of times the teachers look at us in more of a consultant role, like, how can I do this? As opposed to they want to sit down and actually work on something together and work towards a goal. It's more like, hey, I heard there's this really cool app called X, and can you show me how to use that and do it in my classroom? As opposed to, looking at the learning goals, and then working backwards from there. And so I think that's something that's important to distinguish, and we don't want to fall into that. I think it's important not to fall into that role as like implementation support as a coach. You know, we don't want to be the guy that goes in and teaches everybody how to use iMovie or things like that, the tools. We want to be someone who's helping to build capacity with the people who we're working with.
So that brings me to kind of wondering, as we're talking about what an EdTech coach is, what are some of the activities, or how would you describe the actions that the EdTech coach would do? Because I heard little bits and pieces. I heard planning. I heard building relationships. So I guess my question is, if you were talking to a principal, or if you were talking to a superintendent, or somebody who was thinking about implementing this role, because, I mean, let's face it, with everything that happened with COVID, I hope, that is my sincerest hope, that more and more schools are going to really start pushing for this role, realizing, because we had one EdTech coach in every single one of our schools. And I can't tell you how valuable that was to our teachers as they transitioned. And then I'm watching other schools that didn't have that. And you could kind of see where these teachers were reaching out and trying to figure this out, but they didn't have that coach with them to support them. And I will say that the EdTech coaching community did a beautiful job of pushing out as much as they could to reach people outside of their regular circle. They were pushing stuff out on Twitter, out on YouTube, Facebook groups, all of that. And that it was wonderful. But then of course those relationships weren't built. Were they getting the just-in-time PD they actually needed, or were they just pulling in and looking at which tool will help me survive this pandemic and everything? So I guess bringing it back to my question is, what are the actions that an EdTech coach would be doing inside of their schools if you were trying to describe it to somebody?
When I speak with an administrator that hasn't worked with me yet, I use the word job embedded coaching. This is something where I am most effective, according to teachers as well, if I'm in the classroom with the teachers. Certainly, if there's any basic skills that teachers need to have at the very beginning, if they're on a pretty basic level, that's one thing for some initial training. But being, Adam and I like to say in our book, we want to be in the habitat. We want to see what teachers are doing. That not only helps build relationships, but it helps us to then be able to work with that teacher on that collaborative environment. So rather than saying, I think for your school, everybody should use Flipgrid and you should all be recording everyone needs to do that. If I'm a teacher and I hear that, oh, it's just another initiative. But if somebody's been in my classroom and they say, I saw that your kids were doing a great job with Think, Pair, Share, but when I was a teacher, it was hard for me to hear all of the conversations. Do you struggle with that too? Oh yeah, I do. Perfect. Okay, let's talk about Flipgrid. So you have an in if you actually have been in the teacher's classroom. I know when I was a teacher, if I had an administrator evaluate me and I felt like they were hardly ever in my classroom all year long, I didn't take their words very seriously, right? So similarly, coaches need to be on the ground in the classrooms with the students, with the teachers, so that they are able to make that impact in a much greater scale.
Yeah, and I think what Stephen said earlier about, he alluded to the planning stages, that's huge right there. As an EdTech coach, I guess for lack of a better term, it's almost like you're a filter. I've seen some of my biggest coaching wins have been when I've been given the ability to, when I've pushed into PLCs and planning time. Because a lot of times teachers will plan out the whole semester and all the stuff that great, learning goals and stuff, but they're not trained like I am to think with an EdTech mind. So when I've been in there while they're planning, I can kind of see what they're planning and then offer suggestions there. So it's better, because if I come see their plan afterwards and then offer it, it's like an autopsy. It's too late. They don't want to go back and change it. But if I'm doing it on the fly, they take more ownership of it. It's not just me throwing in my 2 cents at the end. And some of my biggest wins, I mean, I think 3 or 4 years ago, I had kind of introduced Pear Deck, and a few people were interested. But once I got into those PLCs, all of a sudden the entire staff was clamoring to the admin, hey, we need the premium one. And now they can't imagine not teaching without it. And they've been very innovative with it. So it's because I was in the planning stages first instead of waiting till after that I was able to have some great success.
So it's interesting to listen to you guys, because I think, as you alluded, Ashley, we all come at this from different angles. And so one of the things that I have found over the years that sometimes I throw monkey wrenches into things because I've now spent so much time also at the top end of the system. So of course, sometimes I'm looking at things from about 100,000 feet. So that can sometimes be good and sometimes it can be really bad. But I think one of the challenges that I've often seen as schools, because as you were saying, like, Adam, I think you said you've been doing this now for 16 years, something, and I was thinking back, when you said that, I started doing the math and I realized my first one-to-one school was like 28 years ago, which, was PowerBook 160s. This was not like hardcore ed tech stuff. I mean, we literally were using the software, Microsoft Works, the ultimate in the oxymoron software. And, you had an hour of battery life and it was a very different world. But I was at the beginning of that when it was really a very beginning idea. And then when I joined Maine's program, it was a very beginning idea, this idea that every single middle school kid in the entire state was going to have a laptop, and we're going to have Wi-Fi, and we're going to have broadband. We put a T1 line in all those buildings. I mean, it's a very different world. But as we get into these things, in particular, I think with COVID, because so many schools went from 0 to 60, right? Like they didn't have a one-to-one program. They saw this absolute need. Kids were now at home. So they went out and they bought a bunch of Chromebooks or whatever device they could get. They pushed them out to the kids. And effectively, you now have a one-to-one program. And we know for schools that have gone one-to-one, it's usually a multi-year planning process, right? On multiple levels, right? Whether it's the financial parts and everything else, but the most critical, of course, is that kind of teacher training and planning and how are we going to leverage this stuff. And it takes years sometimes to really map it out. And these guys, 0 to 60, I mean, right away, boom. And then, that on top of all the craziness of this past year and a half. And so there's always still that balancing act in my mind that schools are not, they're not funded to the nth degree, right? So funding is always a challenge, which means staffing is a challenge. And I totally agree that as much as you can, you don't want to be the PD delivery mechanism. You don't want to be just giving a lesson. But as you point out, Katz, sometimes though, people need skills. They just need the basic, how do I actually operate this software or whatever? And as we know from all learners, some folks you sound like Charlie Brown's mother until they learn how to use the tool, even though you're trying to get them to think about why they would use the tool. Like, why do you even want to learn to use Pear Deck, right? Like if you just come at me saying, I need to learn Pear Deck, and you can't even tell me why, then I'm really kind of going to resist you a little bit. I'm going to keep pushing you like, well, why do we want to do this, right? But for some folks, until they've gotten through that initial piece, they just can't seem to have that conversation, even though they know something's floating around in the back of their head. And so that's that challenging balancing act, I think, for coaches is how do you balance your time between delivering some of that training, if you will, while also trying to be the coach, because it's easy to get sucked into too much of your time on the training. And then what gets worse is that the thing I think that you didn't mention that you probably try and avoid the most, and this is one of those things I would say, this is absolutely on the I'm not an ed tech coach, or this is not an ed tech coach's job, which is tech support, right? The worst thing in the world. You don't want to be doing tech support, but they know you know how to solve it anyway. So they'll grab you out of the hall. Hey, Adam, get in here. This isn't working. Can you make it work? And you're thinking, this is not my job. And this is not a good use of our time, right? And that's the easy thing to get sucked into. And it's really hard, of course, to tell somebody no. No, I'm not going to help you.
And we run into that in my district. So I'm in charge of all of the ed tech coaches in our district. Well, in charge of is about, I work with the ed tech coaches in our district. And I put it in my book, this 10-minute rule, because thinking about it also from a tech director's point of view, I don't have enough technicians to physically be there to fix every last minute problem either. So a class is about to start, teacher can't get into their stuff, their device falls off the, whatever it is, it's not plugged in, or, but I put in that there should be a 10-minute rule for an ed tech coach. If you don't know the answer and you can't fix it in 10 minutes to go do all of the coaching, co-teaching, co-planning, all of the other things that you need to be doing, then your questions to the teacher go from what's wrong to how can I support you to continue this lesson or to continue on your journey of the day until technical support can come in. Like that's the piece that even I, as when I was an ed tech coach, it was really hard to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't change that light bulb, that projector light bulb right this second. I know that it puts you in a bad situation, but let me get tech support. I know we won't see them for at least half a day, but I'm scheduled to be working with this teacher group. I think that's a really hard balance to have.
Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest ones. But, that problem that you just described, it's actually the same thing for the tech support people. We had to work so hard with tech support folks to convince them that if you can't solve the problem in about 5 minutes, give the person a different computer and re-image that one. Don't, because they're a constant, the reason they do that job is because they enjoy problem solving. Mm-hmm. But you can sit there for days trying to figure out what's wrong with the computer, or you can just re-image the thing and just move on with your day. And if the problem persists after re-imaging or whatever, nowadays you don't have to quite do that quite so much with more modern machines, but then you say, oh, there must be a physical issue. Send it in for a physical repair. It can be that simple, but it doesn't really it doesn't allow you to exercise those problem solving bones either. But yeah, so I think that's the balancing act challenge that I have seen for ed tech coaches is some of the things you guys have described are absolutely where we know you're most effective, but it's usually like on kind of that hierarchy of need. It's not the bottom layer for teachers. Their first thing is it's not working, right? The projector, I can't get it on the wall or whatever. And trying to balance that, I think is a really interesting challenge. But it just, that's part of the job, I guess. Right.
So Steve, I don't think we've heard from you what this looks like, what the ed tech coach role looks like.
Sure. I think you asked one of the things you asked was what do we need? And I think one of the, and I'm looking at, ISKL, the school I'm at is a top tier international school. It's a private school and not-for-profit school. So we actually have a very wide range of choice for teachers. So we get very high functioning teachers with a great deal of efficacy. We have about 400 employees, and we will often get 2,000 applications for 20 positions on an annual basis. And so we really have our pick of the litter. So the teachers we're getting are already very high functioning, have worked in one-to-one programs and all those kind of things. But I think so that we're starting off, I think, in a much better situation than, say, where we were at when I was in California, or even the previous two schools that I've worked at, because they were just implementing one-to-one programs. But I think what's really key, especially at a building level, is we need to have the administration support, and it needs to be vocal, not just implied. It needs to be, hey, we want you to work with your tech coach. We want you to plan. We want your tech coach in your unit planning meetings with you so that they can help support the learning and the teaching. And I think what Adam said is really important. Once they get those units set, you don't want to take it all apart and add something to it. I mean, the work has been done. So I think it's really key for us as coaches to be there in the planning stage if a team is doing some planning. And I work really hard to get in. We call them collaboration meetings, and I work really hard to get into those meetings. And a lot of times I don't have anything to say, but the times I'm always looking for an in, so to speak, as to, how can I help them teach this unit? How can I help the students learn it better? And I think it's really important to really be there and be visible and be actively engaged in those types of activities. And like thinking about what you guys are talking about as far as, a lot of the schools don't have one-to-one and things like that. And it makes me think of the school I came from, Korea International School, which was a great school. And it was implementing, it wasn't quite one-to-one all the way K through 12 at that point. And so, and a lot of the teachers were coming from schools in the US that had never taught one-to-one. And so we had a different set of circumstances than what I have in ISKL. And what we did, we had a 5-person Edtech team for 1,200, it was a 1,200 student school. And what we ended up doing was we would run PD sessions, and I know that's what it is when it's private school. You have a lot more support. But
I literally started doing the division here to figure out how many it was to one.
Yeah. And also, but understand, they were implementing one-to-one, it was in the high school and they were working their way down. So there was a need for more tech coaches at that point. And what we were doing was we would pick a topic for professional development and we would run it between the 5 of us. We would run the session 20 times a week, and we scheduled it so that the teachers could go on their prep time if they wanted to. And they were half-hour sessions. They were focused on learning. It wasn't sit and get. I mean, maybe once in a while it was, but the idea was that they could walk away and next period go and implement that in the class. That was our goal. And we had a really good participation in the 4 years that we did that. But also what that served as is it served as kind of your foot in the door to doing a deeper lesson planning with those teachers who show up to your professional development sessions. And I looked at it as kind of, like a sales job in a sense. That's our big timeshare presentation, and the people who show up, you follow up with them and see if maybe they want to sign up for a little something more, and then you get involved with the planning. And I think it's a really effective way to get your foot in the door and build these partnerships with the teachers. And it worked really well because after I left, there was definitely a change in focus at the school. Now they had one-to-one from top to bottom. They were focusing more on STEM. They had other priorities. And I would say, we did a good job bringing the level of technology integration up in that school, and to a point where, you work yourself out of a job in some respects. I mean, they still have tech coaches there, but it's not that same level of intensity of professional development and hustle, I guess you would say, that we were trying to do to get everybody kind of at a certain level. And so I think there's, at my point here now at ISKL, we have teachers with such high efficacy that I really have to up my game to be able to say, well, you can also do this, and maybe you can give the students a choice of doing that. And I'm trying to think of even better ways, because they're already doing great stuff in their classes, even at the youngest kids, kindergarten, and they're doing such great work that it takes a lot of creativity, and I really have to stay up on my game to be able to serve the teachers that we have at our school.
Yeah, I like what you guys both kind of alluded to, the fact about the importance of admin support. Some of my biggest wins came because I had admin support, having that admin mandate, because especially when you're brand new on the job and staff doesn't really know what to make of you, you're just another visitor walking through, and you're still learning the job. You're still reading my book and then Ashley's book. You're going to read that one too as well. So that's going to help. But but when you have a clear mandate from the admin, that the admins are mandated, hey, you know what, this is what our tech coach is going to be working on, so that they have that expectation. They can't just close the door on you. I've been lucky that the admin at the schools that I serve have given me master keys, so I can walk in whenever I want. But I do that when I have that mandate. Like, my original mandate was, all right, we're going Google. So we need to teach everybody Gmail, Google Drive, and everything associated with it. So when they had that mandate, I was able to get things done. When I haven't had a clear mandate, my work has been a lot more difficult. I think it was in 2018, our superintendent made this lofty goal that every teacher will become Google Certified Educator Level 1. So that fell on me. So I mean, I was up for the challenge, but because I had that mandate from the highest authority in there, you know, the site admin and then the coaches and all the staff knew it came from the highest authority. So I had to have that. I had that weight behind it. So when I spoke, they were more apt to listen and follow through with it because I had that mandate. So cultivating your relationships with your admin is paramount. It's worth its weight in gold. But you know, once you have that mandate, you know, if we're talking about, you know, the mechanics of the job, you know, how do you get in classrooms? And we talk about in our book and many of our sessions is about how do you get invited in? You know, sometimes you have to kind of barge your way in a little bit. You're going to get those deer in the headlight looks like, oh, are you here to judge me? No, I'm here to learn. I tell them I'm here to learn from you. I want to see what your kids are doing. And I don't know your subject, but I know you do. And I want to learn from you. And that kind of lowers they put their guard down a little bit and they start getting used to seeing me often. But how do you get back in there? Well, we talk about being memorable and at the same time being forgetful. I'm purposely forgetful when I'm walking classrooms. I'll purposely leave my sunglasses or or my coffee mug because then I have a reason to go back. And sometimes I don't have to go back for it because they'll message me, oh yeah, you left this. Oh, I want to go back in there. And that's just another opportunity for me to have that organic conversation with those teachers. But at the same time, when I am invited, when I am co-teaching a lesson with them and working with them, you know, those are usually memorable moments for those kids. The kids will see me on campus and I say, hey, are you coming back? Are you going to teach that lesson again or something cool? I go, well, ask your teacher. Because the teachers can tell me no, I can suggest, and they can tell me no till they're blue in the face. But when it comes to the kids, it's a lot harder to say no. We like to say that the quickest way to a teacher's heart is through their students. So, you know, you start building that buzz, almost like you're the ice cream man. So the ice cream man, you hear that tune, and it just brings back those memories. And if you can build that buzz about what you're doing, you eventually your calendar is going to fill up pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it's going back to the admin conversation too. You're saying your calendar is going to fill up quickly, but we really want that admin support so we can be inclusive coaches. I'm very passionate about telling administrators, I want to work with every single teacher on your site as much as possible. I don't want to work with just the volunteers, so to speak, just those that want me to come in. Because a lot of times, many teachers just don't know what to ask. It's not that they don't want the support, but they feel that they don't know what to ask. They don't even know. There's so many apps out there. There's this teacher doing that, this teacher, I don't even know. I'm just not even they're not gonna volunteer for me to go in there, right? It's pretty rare. So that's why, as Adam said, we walk classrooms, we build those relationships. One of my tricks is hanging out in wherever the teachers hang out, if it's teacher's lounge or, you know, the lunchroom, whatever. And I'll just sit there and, you know, be doing something on my computer or whatever. I listen to the conversations. And as you're listening to conversations, sometimes there's something you can say, oh, you know what? There was a teacher that I was just in so-and-so's classroom and they did this to kind of solve that pain point. So I think something that you were saying, Steve, was it's hard to keep up with those innovative teachers, right? Like, oh man, I got to up my game. But one of the things that I like to do is think of myself also as someone that can facilitate collaboration between the teachers themselves. So, because a lot of times they come up with great ideas that we never thought of, right? Those innovative teachers. So since I'm able to visit many classrooms and they're not, I can take pictures of what the students are doing. I can say so-and-so's doing this. So I think that saved me at the beginning when I was a new EdTech coach, and I was like, oh, I'm not quite sure if I have a bunch of great ideas yet, right? Try to take what some of the other teachers were doing and share it with others on campus. That really helped.
It's interesting. I think you guys have all kind of alluded to a thing that we used to say a lot at the MLTI program in Maine. You know, we were very fortunate to work with Seymour Papert directly, right? Because he lived in Maine and he was kind of the vision keeper for the program. And he was the one who really was the impetus for it, because it was a conversation he had with Governor Angus King when Angus was our governor that spurred Angus to create the program, you know, create the funding and get the political will to make it happen. And what Seymour used to say was, you know, there's Monday and there's someday, right? And that's that notion that sometimes, you need to give the teacher something for Monday, which is kind of what you were saying, Steve, something they can just do now. Like they can leave and they can implement and they're going to see some positive value because that's easy to digest. It leaves a good positive impact. And then there's the someday, right? And that's the other thing, is to be careful that we don't always, because we get excited about it, because we're always looking at the horizon line thinking, whoa, someday we'll be able to do this, that, the other thing. And can you imagine when we're able to do this or that, or, oh, this new thing just came out, that's going to allow us to do, and you start throwing out these ideas, and some teachers will look at you like, oh, I can't do that, right? And they're just like, that's too much, and then it kind of scares them off. And so I think it is important to always kind of keep that Monday, someday, that you want to give people some of that horizon line because you want to give them vision, but you feed them the Monday. Otherwise, they're going to feel like they can't keep up with you and they're going to get intimidated, right? And I think, Kat, to your kind of this notion of, people not knowing what to say or to ask, right? And that's part of that, intimidation factor when you give them too much of the someday. But another guy that I work with, Jim Moulton, who's one of the best ed tech coaches and integrators I know. He wrote a great article years ago, and you can still look it up for Edutopia. And it was about meta cluelessness, right? And the state of knowing that which you don't know, right? So, and it's a really important thing, I think, for teachers to what we used to always kind of joke, like, have you achieved meta cluelessness, right? Meaning, you may not know how to use Pear Deck, but it exists. That's all. I don't know much more, but I know it exists. Or I might know a little bit about what it does, but I don't know how to use it. But that's okay. At least from Pear Deck, I have achieved meta cluelessness, as opposed to the teacher who doesn't even realize that type of technology exists, so they can't even ask the question. Right. So helping, I think that's one of those other things we can do in gentle ways, is just to kind of keep throwing those things out. Kind of as you said, Kat, when you're in the faculty room and you say, hey, I know this guy that does blank. And you're just working to kind of improve people's meta cluelessness, right? To seed the minds with just these interesting ideas that aren't, kind of going to stress them out. It's not pushing them to do something now. But it'll, teachers hear these things, it joggles around in the back of the brain. And then one day, all of a sudden, they look at some new thing that they've got to do or whatever. And all of a sudden, things make connections. And they go, oh, I have an idea. I need to call Kat back because I know she can help me do this, right? I don't know how it's going to work, but I have this idea, this kind of vague thing. And that's, that's another big victory, right? It's just feeding people some of that, help them with their meta cluelessness, give them some Monday so that they know that they can count on you, but feed them someday too, so that they can keep building that vision. Because I think people need the vision too, right? And I think that's also one of those critical things that is tough, because it isn't really the job of the ed tech coach to coach their administrators in how to be administrators and provide both the vision, right? Like you said, Adam, superintendent said, this is what I want. Well, it's clear, it's explicit, and whether or not what he wants or she wants is right or wrong doesn't really matter. At least there's clear direction. This is what we're doing, because you can act upon that, right? And you can, as you've all kind of alluded, when you're in that role, you can act with now intent and authority, in a sense. You're not just like having to barge in. It's like, hey, look, we're all on the ship together, and since the ship is headed that way, we got to learn how to do that, right? And so, but that's a tough part. And that's where I think a lot of my job when I was at the state level, that was a lot of my job, was working with superintendents and their principals to help them work with the rest of the system to say, okay, how do I help you paint that vision? Because of course their jobs are painting the vision not only for their faculty, but for their public. Because in some instances you'll get parents who say, basically like we would here in New England, I walk to school barefoot uphill, both directions in the snow. We don't need those blasted computers. We didn't have them when I was a kid. Why do we have, and so you have to kind of also, their job, of course, is to also work with the public and bring them along so that it allows you to do your job, right?
So thinking about that administrator piece, I want to go back to something that I think Kat said was, where the teachers say something like, I don't take administration seriously when they're coming into my room twice a year for an observation. They give me a little bit of feedback, but they weren't there for the lesson before. They weren't there for my follow-up. They weren't there. So I take it with a grain of salt and move on. I've seen some ed tech coaches who have had this weird, I've seen some accidentally get put into that administrator column, and I've seen administrators use them as like another assistant principal, which is not good in my opinion, because then the teachers don't see them as a coach and as a support. They see them as another administrator who's coming in and they work on the administrative team. And then I've also seen administrators not support their ed tech coach as much else than, okay, go fix this broken thing. Let's put you on the team for making sure that testing goes off without a hitch. Testing and ed tech coaches, it's not, that's not necessarily what they're there for. So there's this balance that I'd like to have us have a discussion about as to that role, because the third way that I've seen ed tech coaches seen as like the administrative snitch. I don't want that ed tech coach in my room, because they're going to go and they're going to tell my administrator that what I'm doing in my classroom. And I don't, and they're there to observe me and report back to somebody else. So I just want to hear some thoughts around that, as how, as an ed tech coach, you can define yourself as what you need to define yourself as without falling into one of those unintended loopholes or unintended definitions. And if that question didn't make any sense, it's okay.
I think, part of what Jeff said is we shouldn't have to give professional development to the administrators, but unfortunately the reality is with some we do, and they don't really understand what our role is. And I'd say that's less and less as time goes on. 10 years ago, I felt like that was my biggest goal, was to get my administrators clued in to what was going on, but now it's not so much. But I think that it's really important. Well, in my position, so I'm in a private school. I have a 2-year contract. There's no union. There are certain goals that need to be met for the school. And so although I have a clear job description, there is some bit of negotiation as to what I will do. And I think there's always that, I think regardless of your situation, there's going to be a bit of a negotiation, and it's hard to create a hard line like, nope, I'm not going to help with map testing. That's not a coaching position when they need someone to do it. But I think then sometimes you can say, well, hey, I'm helping with map testing and you're asking me also to do this. I'm not having time for my principal duties, which is to be in the classroom. And so I think that we have to be flexible, because the school has a lot of needs and not enough resources, any school. And so I think that's something that's really important, but I think being consistent about what you do and being able to demonstrate results is also really important to make your case. If they don't see you in class, or they're not seeing any products or what's happening in the classroom, then why don't you have time for this or for that or for the other thing? And I think just one other comment about something you said is that if there's not trust between you and the teacher, you're not going to be in that teacher's class. And so if you go and snitch, that was the word you used, to the principal that, this teacher did this and this teacher did that, the word's going to get around really quickly. And I think it's really important to publicly only share the positive of what goes on in the different classrooms. And if there's an issue that, where you feel like there is potentially a legal issue or a child endangerment, I mean, obviously you have to say something about that. But I didn't like the way that the teacher set up their classroom or disciplined this kid or things like that. I think that's that's the teacher's decision, and that's how they run their class.
I want to be super clear. I've never seen an ed tech coach like go back and say something that they shouldn't have. I think I was trying to get across just the idea that, especially when you're a first time ed tech coach, there's that feeling out of trying to figure out, is this person trustworthy? And I think that trustworthiness is probably the most important piece of the role.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
for all my ed tech coach friends, I've never seen anybody
yeah,
actually.
no, me either. And you know, and I think like going back to what Kat was saying earlier about the reaching the reluctant teachers and things like that, I think it kind of plays in with the same thing. And you have to use some of those strategies of being visible. We used to call it drive-bys. You know, you walk the halls and maybe ask people how their weekend was, but don't bring up anything tech unless they do. And things like that. Share the great stuff that is done in other classes. Hey, did you see what Miss Jen's kids did with the podcast? You know, you want to try that maybe in the future? You know, those kind of things. And one of the strategies that actually we worked really well when I was in Korea was we used to, every once in a while, we would serve breakfast for anybody who wanted it. And we would cook up breakfast burritos in our office because we had like a full-size classroom office. And we would bring in our camping stoves, make breakfast burritos and show up. We had music playing. We had couches, come in for some breakfast. And that would definitely get people into the office that wouldn't normally take the time to stop by, you know? So I think it's a whole mixed bag, but I think building that relationship and having the trust with the teachers is key. If you don't have that, you're not going to be in the classroom.
Yeah, I think if you're new to the job, because that's always the hardest time when you're new to something, part of I guess as you get into it is you also kind of need to feel out just in the interviewing process and whatnot, where you sit in the system and who do you really report to, right? You know, obviously it's very different from school to school, district to district. You know, like Steve in a private school, and because I've done this in a private school too, I've worked in a number of independent schools where I was pretty much the system. I was it, you know, and maybe I had one other person who I was working with, but the two of us were kind of parallel to each other. And then we both ostensibly just reported straight to the headmaster because the school just didn't have enough infrastructure as far as administration to have us go anywhere else. But in a larger district, in a public school system, you usually have some sort of hierarchy of stuff. And the question then becomes, for example, one of the simple ones is, do the ed tech coaches report up to the IT director who's worried about the network? Or is there is it more like up to the chief academic officer or something in that kind of academia space versus the IT space? Because that can sometimes really flavor like some of the issues we talked about before, which is how do you balance your time between tech support and ed tech coaching? And, you know, if you're reporting up to the IT director who's running the networks, that person's thought process it's not always true, but may be a little bit more leaning toward the techie stuff.
I was just about to argue with you because
but it just kind of, you know, it depends. Every individual's different, right?
Yeah, because I'm actually the tech director who's in charge of both the network and then I'm also instructional tech, but we're kind of a smaller district too.
Right. And you know, and it is very personal. I mean, you know, like there are a lot of us, I was an IT director, but I was a teacher first.
Yeah.
I know other IT directors who came straight out of the military and were hardcore data security, cybersecurity, you know, lock the system down because of course that's how they were trained. Mm-hmm. I don't blame them for that. I mean, they're not wrong. It's just that sometimes, you know, strong passwords in kindergartners just don't get along. So I think some of that is also there, you know, when we say like, it's hard to try and kind of coach your administrator. Sometimes you also have to look to who is my direct supervisor, so to speak, and can they lend a hand in this kind of establishment of my positioning within the system? But I think you're absolutely right. You do have to try and find that trust factor. You know, one of the things I think I used to do a lot when I was meeting with teachers for the first time was to just, you know, as I think you said, Adam, is part of it is just, hey, I'm here to learn. I want to know what you do. And, you know, I'm interested in make sure they know I was a classroom teacher too. Right? Because if they don't, you know, teachers, if they don't think you've ever been in a classroom, you've lost all credibility right away. And so I don't always tell them the last time I was a classroom teacher was last century, but I say, I started in the classroom. But then, you know, oftentimes because you can see it in some people's eyes that are thinking, oh, this guy's here to tell me how I have to like do everything with technology. And I'll say, you know, what is the one lesson that you retool every year? You know, and I'll tell them, for me, because I was a middle school math teacher, it was fractions. I never taught fractions the same way ever. For every year that I was the classroom teacher, I did it differently every single year, because every single year at the end of that session or section, 100% of my kids did not understand fractions. So I was always seeking a new way, right? And say, maybe that's a lesson we can look at. Let's plan that one. Because what's the danger? You were going to retool it anyway, right? You weren't satisfied anyway. Maybe there's something we can do here. It's a little less threatening than, what's the one lesson that kids who come back to you after they've graduated, gone to college, got their PhDs, and come back and say, hey, remember we used to do that such and such project? Don't touch that one, right? And sometimes I think that you have to be explicit with them to say, that's not my intent. I'm not here to say that every single thing you do is supposed to be about technology. I'm here to try and improve, as you said, right, Steve? We're here to improve teaching and learning. Some things are already perfect, or as near as we need them to be. Don't touch, right? Winning strategy, that's that old saying, right? We never change a winning strategy. But there's other things, yeah, it could use some improvement. And I think every teacher knows the things, or 2 or 3 or 4 things that they want to do better with, and you have to go there, as opposed to coming in with a curriculum. All right, I'm here to teach you how to teach kids to write better. And it's like, well, you just walked into the classroom with a teacher who is known statewide as the greatest writing teacher to walk the earth. It probably wasn't the right thing to say, so.
Yeah, circling back to the whole idea of the snitch, we have some great stories about that. But because actually you asked about, if you're a newcomer to the EdTech coaching game. My first semester on the job, we had just gotten, our middle school had just gotten their first batch of Chromebook carts. And so we were, slowly, barely getting everyone started with using them. A lot of teachers were still kind of afraid of it. And we had a checkout system, which it was in the library somewhere, and teachers can volunteer to check them out. And so I knew it was going to be like pulling teeth to get people to try out this new toy that they were all afraid of. And, I was more focused at that time of my job on the teachers and just building their skills before I can get them to be comfortable enough to use the carts. So we had a district walkthrough. So the district admin did an instructional rounds walkthrough. And, the superintendent, the one who years later mandated me to get everyone Google certified, because they called the carts the computers on wheels, the cows. So she remarked, why are the cows out to pasture? They're sitting there in this office collecting dust. And she laid into that the site principal that during our debrief session. I was there to witness it, and the site principal was just deer in the heads, like, oh man, my boss is ripping me a new one. They spent all this money on it. It's not getting used, and and she's looking at me while she's chewing out the principal. So I'm like, oh crap, this is gonna fall. This also has to do with me a little bit, and I'm brand new on this, so I'm a little nervous. So I have no ill will toward the site principal, but it was because it was a knee-jerk reaction that I think anybody would have. And this is a slippery slope to get caught into being what we call in our book. You don't want to wear that sheriff's hat, because as a tech coach, if you're wearing the sheriff's hat, you're seen as the sheriff. Again, you lose all credibility. You're seen as a snitch. And the principal in a knee-jerk reaction said, all right, here we go. The superintendent left. All right, here's the plan. All right, Adam, you're going to report to me on everybody who's using or not using these Chromebook cards. And I'm sitting there trying to process. And you know what? Thank the Lord, I had the clarity of mind at the moment to stop her and try. I go, whoa. I actually said, I ain't no snitch. I'm not going to do that for you. I'm not going to rat on these teachers because I won't be able to coach. I go, I'm new here, but that's not going to work. Right? So what I did say, and I somehow I had the clarity of mind to come up with this. I go, listen, I'm going to give you, the admin, a menu of what I've trained teachers on, and I want you to go look for evidence. That's your job to be the sheriff, to be the hammer that comes down if they're not doing what's being mandated, not mine. I am on a teacher's salary. I'm parallel to them. I'm not going to be your I'm not going to be your left hand to make a biblical reference there. But it's an easy trap to fall into, because if you're brand new, you just want to do what you're told. And, luckily I was able to kind of catch it right then and there. If I'd have caught it later, it would have been too late.
Yeah, and it's definitely something you want to address early on when you first, if you're a new EdTech coach, talking with the admin and finding out, like defining that role kind of together. But the way I like to do this, because I work with a lot of different administrators because I'm at a lot of different sites, is asking them a lot of questions to find out what is their goal, and then making sure that I align my philosophy and my beliefs about coaching to that goal. So if it's, well, we want to, and a lot of times, which I don't love, but a lot of times it has to do with test scores, right? Okay, well, we really need our writing test scores to go up, or whatever. Okay, well, great. That's something that I can work with teachers on. I'd love to be in their classrooms. These are things we've done before. But again, like Adam said, you got to be real careful about that. You do not want to be seen as that sheriff.
So we've been together for an hour now, and I could spend the entire evening with you guys. Like, seriously, I'm having a blast talking to you. But I'm going to have one more question, and then I will let you guys go and do what it is that you do at this late hour for most of us, and for Steve, first thing in the morning. So my question is, what makes an EdTech coach different from other types of educational coaches that we see? So
well, I think that's a great question, and that's a really challenging question. Because I firmly believe that we should, even as tech coaches, we should be instructional coaches, and like I said earlier, it's about the teaching and learning. It's never about the tools. It shouldn't be about the tools. I'd say that what makes us different is we're really focusing on taking advantage of different aspects of technology in order to improve the teaching and learning, whereas a literacy coach might be focusing on writer's workshop or something like that. We're really looking at being, I think, cutting edge and trying to use the technology to redefine the way teaching happens, to be able to do things that you couldn't do without the technology. And I think there's lots of great teaching strategies. There's lots of outstanding pedagogy that's been around for hundreds of years. But what can we do now that we couldn't have done without this device or without this app or without this site? How can we make the teaching and learning even better because of the tools that we now have? And it's important for us to stay on the cutting edge with these kind of strategies and these tools, and to go and learn and present at conferences and be in the heart of that. But I think really it's about the opportunity to redefine education with the tools that we bring to the table.
It's interesting because I think I would agree with that, but at the same time, I would put another perspective on it, which would be to say that in some ways, I think EdTech coaches are different, but at the same time, they're not in a sense that, I guess ultimately they're different, but what makes them different is that I think we're in a position to think about the kind of pure notion of pedagogy and what we know is good pedagogy and what we know makes, what empowers learning and what kids need to learn and what teachers need to teach and these kinds of things. And we can actually try and implement it. Whereas so many other coaches, a literacy coach or, whatever, the math coach, something, they're always hamstrung by the fact that, without the technology anyway, there were things that they knew, I wish we could do blank, but they didn't have a way to actually make it happen. There's so little today that you can't really do that you can imagine. If you can imagine it, you probably can do it. It may be insanely expensive, in which case you end up not doing it or whatever. But generally speaking, especially, and this, this is not true in every district, I know, but increasingly with the expansion of high quality broadband, with the expansion of high quality wireless, powerful computing devices at the fingertips of our kids, there's so much that we can do that we probably always, so in some sense, like I totally agree with the redefining thing. Like I'm a big Ruben Puntadura fan. He and I are good buddies. And, the whole notion of redefinition and doing things differently. But at the same time, I know, having spent so much time with Ruben, oftentimes when someone asks him, like, how would you redefine this? He simply restates something that we always knew was the right thing to do. It's just we couldn't do it because we didn't have the tools to get it done. Right. But now that we can, and sometimes it's simply like the power of computational computing can maybe do something repetitively quickly, where before you had kids just kind of like manually doing it and they could only get through 2 or 3 examples and it wasn't enough to cement a concept. And now you can do it like infinite numbers of times in 2 minutes because of the computers or something. Right. So it's different, but ultimately I think the thing to remember is that what we teach people to do, or what we're helping people to do, isn't necessarily different. It's, like I think if someone feels threatened, a teacher, like if you sense a teacher is feeling threatened because they think that you're trying to tell them to teach differently or to do something that they fundamentally would think, well, that's bad teaching practice. That's totally not the case, right? What we're actually trying to do is to bring people back to what we know is really good instructional practice. And it's the reality is that sometimes when you're in a heterogeneous classroom with 30 kids and not enough, textbooks and all these other resource constraints, you end up losing your capacity to do what you know is right for kids because you're just trying to survive, right? And when you get the technology, you start to get back to a position where, because the computers can sometimes, not that they're babysitting, but allow kids to work at different paces, focus on different things, but still empower the teacher to keep track of that, right? We're helping the teachers get back to the pedagogy that they were taught when they were in school and knew, like when they were really optimistic and young and getting into teaching, oh, I'm going to save the world. We can get them back to that because, I saw that when we started laptop programming. I remember I had a teacher in my middle school when I was the IT director of our district, of one of the big districts, and she had said at the beginning of MLTI, like, I don't need to learn this computer thing because I'm retiring at the end of this year, right? And it was about March of that year, and she said to me, I saw her in the hall one day, she says, hey, I want to let you know, I'm not retiring. This has completely re-energized my teaching, right? And that was just 1 year, the very first year in a one-to-one program with, at the time, this would have been like iBook G3s. They were pretty good, but they had iMovie, right? And they had AppleWorks. And between iMovie, AppleWorks, and basic internet connectivity, she was doing great stuff. And it was so invigorating to her because all of a sudden she could do the things I think she had always dreamt of for the last 30 years as a classroom teacher, right? So I think that's what makes us different, but at the same time, the fundamentalness of it is, right, it's not different. And I think that's really important for people to understand as you're talking to teachers, so that you're not making them feel like, I'm asking you to plow all new earth, throw out everything you knew about pedagogy for the last 30 years because now we've got technology, because that's totally not the case.
Yeah, I think what makes us different, separate from other coaches, is a quote that we put in our book that we borrowed from one of our good friends. He's one of the head honchos out here in California at Q, which is our ISTE affiliate. His name's Joe Marquez, good friend of mine, and he has a great quote I've been using for years called, as a tech coach, you're not changing how you teach students, you're changing how you reach them. I think we come with a skill set that is going to change how you reach students. You're going to reach students on levels that other coaches who don't have our skill set aren't really capable of doing yet. And it's our job to reach the students and reach those teachers in a way that ever been done before. I know you were talking about redefinition. I heard you guys talking about that, and I think Jeff, you were talking about, if you can imagine it, you can do it, but you don't have the tools yet. I'm totally thinking of Iron Man 2 when Tony Stark is watching the video that his dad left for him. It was almost that exact same speech. I'm hampered by the tools of my time, but I know that you're going to figure it out one day. And he invents the arc reactor, blah blah blah, and the rest is history. Thanos is dead now. So, anyways, I was thinking about that the whole time. But yeah, like going back to that quote, man, we're not here to change how you teach, but how you reach. And I think that's a motto that I've definitely tried to pattern myself out of, and as I'm in this role. And maybe one other thing that I think that makes us different, we are cross curricular. What we do can be done across in any grade level, any subject. A lot of what I'll see something I see in a math class, and I try to apply it in an ELA class. And you get a lot of coaching wins when you see those cross curricular applications. I think that's definitely something that makes EdTech coaches unique.
And I think the reason that it's cross-curricular, or the reason that because we're cross-curricular, we do focus on the pedagogy. Like I know both Steve and Jeff alluded to, we see the how, not the what. As a teacher, I walk into high school classrooms, high school math classrooms. I don't remember that high school math. I don't know how to teach that lesson, like as far as the content, but I'm focused on the how. And so I think that because that is our focus, because there's so many different content areas and grade levels that we're teaching, we don't have all the standards memorized for every single teacher that we're working with. I think that makes us different. But kind of stole what I was going to say a little bit, Adam, but I wanted to connect it to something that Jeff said too. So agreed that we want to use technology to reach students. And I feel like we're the bridge. And so I feel like we know a lot of the stuff that the kids are doing, the technology kids are using today, right? We know about TikTok. I have a TikTok account. I don't use it much. I know you're starting to, Adam. Like, we're interested in all this stuff. We're interested in AI. We're interested in I was telling Adam, oh, what if we could get some holograms, as Jeff was talking about, get some hologram interviews for people that the kids to interview, like all these things that we think of, these things that the kids are immersed in as well, because they're future forward thinking, right? And so that doesn't mean that, like Jeff said, there's a teacher that knows good pedagogy and knows the right way and doesn't know how to do it. And so, for example, I was in a first grade classroom and this teacher was like, man, I just can't get, these kids just don't want to write. They don't want to write. Okay. So very simple. I set up, in Google Classroom, basic digital discussion board. These kids are barely writing a sentence. And they were so thrilled. They felt like they were texting because that's from their world. And so I aligned something that the teacher knew. These kids, I got to get them writing. I got to get them writing every day. They don't want to write. And then something that's in their world with technology. And so that's how we were able to kind of be that bridge. So I feel like EdTech coaches are a bridge.
I like that. EdTech coaches are a bridge. I think we should just coin that quote and we'll just make t-shirts. How's that?
Make t-shirts.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. You guys have been phenomenal. I'm going to have you guys come back one-on-one episodes. And then if you guys want to do more panels, you are always welcome. Just reach out to me. If you have an idea, reach out to me. So thank you so much. And I appreciate you guys spending your evening with me.
Thank you for taking time to listen to the A+ EdTech Coaching podcast. If you have an idea for an episode, or if you'd like to just chat about EdTech coaching, please visit my website, edtechcoachingprimer.com. And if you go to the podcast page, then you will be able to fill out a form and let me know that you're interested in being on the show.